Hey, how's it going, guys? Easy here, and I'll be going over my build starter in 3.10, which is a Archmage Trickster. So I'll be going over some of the concepts that I've used, as well as reason why I chose Trickster over something like Hierophant, as well as other mechanics that I've been abusing to get really good damage and questionable amount of survivability. I currently have 40% mind over matter, so that 5,000 effective life pool is more like 8,000, considering the fact that I have almost 4.5k mana. But survivability in Delirium has been an issue, I think, for everyone, so I'll be taking that with a grain of salt. So let's go into the actual concept of the build directly. So we're going to be building on this support right here, Archmage support. Effectively, what it does is that instead of having a mana cost of 22, for example, for a level 19 Arc, the mana cost of Arc will be something like 570. So instead of 22, it's 570. Now, I'm also wearing this gloves called Voidbringer, which gives 72% increased mana cost of skills, as well as the Fervent Mind Jewel, which also gives 50%. So we're looking at like 150%, 130% increased mana costs on top of having our skills cost effectively percentages of our mana pool. So it doesn't matter if you have 5,000 mana or if you have 300 mana, you're going to be using the same percentage. So what matters is how much mana you have, because for every single mana that you have, the cost of your skill determines how much added lightning damage you gain. So the Archmage support has flat amount of added lightning damage, as well as added lightning damage equal to 27% of your mana cost. So higher your mana cost, higher your damage. So for example, my Arc here has 44k DPS, give or take. If I take off the Fervent Mind Jewel, which granted it has 30% increased spell damage, what's going to matter more is that 50% mana increase cost. Now it has 35k DPS, so that's a considerable amount of damage loss, and you can see the mana cost is also 803 versus 1036. So there's a considerable amount of damage that comes into play when you start to stack mana, and when you start to stack cost increase of mana skills. Now the problem with increasing the cost of mana skills and increasing your mana pool is that there isn't really a consistent way to recover mana. You can use mana flasks, but if I get rid of my mana and I pop a mana flask, as you can see, it takes a considerable amount of time to recover all of that mana. And as you get higher and higher mana pools, not that I'm going to push this too much further, it's gonna take longer and longer to recover, especially for something like Hierophants, which can recover even more or stack even higher amounts of mana. So the reason why we picked Trickster is actually for this ascendancy note right here, Weave the Arcane. Weave the Arcane gives you 20% chance to recover 10% of your mana when you use skill. So because you recover 10% and not a flat amount, it doesn't matter how much max mana we have. When we use skills, it will instantly recover 10% of your mana like that. And that brings us to our next skill. How do we recover mana consistently? Because if you just spam our arc, as you can see, that 20% chance to proc is kind of difficult to consistently proc so that we recover mana. So that's why we're using Orb of Storms. And this is something that people are abusing as well with Archmage, is that if you have a duration skill, such as Orb of Storms or any of the brands, the added lightning damage will persist throughout the duration of this skill. So what you want to do is you put down an Orb of Storms, and it doesn't matter how much mana you spent or how much mana you have right now, this Orb of Storms has that added lightning damage effect attached to it. So you put down something like a Storm brand, and that for the entire duration of that brand's life, it has that added damage from Archmage. So we're using the interaction between Orb of Storms and something like Tempest Shield. Tempest Shield is the lowest cost or lowest cast time lightning spell And if you don't know, Orb of Storms has a secondary effect where if you use a lightning spell within the area of Orb of Storms, it procs an additional bolt. So as you can see, if I use if I stand inside the area of effect of Orb of Storms and spam Spectral Shield or Tempest Shield, it's gonna constantly cast at other enemies. And this constant casting, the secondary proc, also benefits from that added lightning damage. So this is where we get our single target. This is extremely strong because one of the main downsides of Archmage is that if you use up your mana, you can't cast anymore, and you don't have a good way to recover mana. Along with the fact that because you're mind over matter, if you take any damage on a boss fight, you're gonna lose your damage, essentially speaking. But with this interaction, you gain mana as you deal damage, and you deal damage extremely fast. You deal damage, like, it's kind of disgusting how strong this is. The only downside to this is the fact that, you know, you have to stand still and you have to constantly put down orbs if the enemy is moving, and if you put down orbs, that means that we're using up mana that could have been used for survivability. So those are some of the interactions that goes on. Let's do a quick map to show you just how effective this build can be. Now, you might ask, if I'm using Arc, how do I recover mana? Because I'm not going to stand there and use Tempest Shield in order to recover mana. Well, a notable and in the future, the flask, the silver flask from Betrayal, as well as Trickster's Ascendancy node, which gives you mana, life, and energy shield and recovery, as well as 70% increased recovery rate, which is huge by the way. Gives you all the sustain you need while you map. And as you can see, like, I rarely dip below, my life doesn't dip. Okay. Yeah, I shouldn't have talked about my life dipping. Yeah, I mean, it's Delirium content. It's kind of a little overtuned. Didn't play well, but as you can see, if you look at my mana pool, and that's the main focus, is like, as I use skills and as I use Arcane Cloak, which is also huge, my mana pool just keeps going back up. Oh, that is a fatty. Yeah, but if you look at the single target, it's pretty strong. Like, I have no complaints, especially considering the fact that there's so many other things that I could do to increase that damage. Also, if you're using Val Arc, which Val skills benefit from Archmage, which is actually busted. So I'm gonna be looking into that as well in the future for another build. But as you can see, like, this is, yeah, we cleared all of the Legion, and it's all we did is stack mana. That's all we did. So there's a lot of cool things going on in this build. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I was struggling with the build starter, but as you can see, there's a lot of positives. There are some kinks that we still have to work out, such as mainly survivability. That's one big thing. But I think every class is having issues with survivability unless you really drop damage. So that's how it is right now. That's how the build is looking like. I'll go ahead and explain some of my gear choices and links. So for the weapon, you just want to get a typical weapon with spell damage. I have some damage to chaos conversion, as well as cast speed and mana. Actually, mana on your weapon is pretty good because there aren't any other prefixes that are pretty good. Mainly because of the fact that if you get spell damage added, lightning damage added a spell, well, we're getting like almost 2,000 added spell damage from Archmage. So it's, comparatively speaking, it's not a very good option, which is why we want to go for mana, which also increases our survivability, our comfort level, and our damage as well. So it's like a triple benefit. For your shield, a similar concept. You want to get life, mana, and I got spell crit chance for spells, which I believe is a prefix. No, that's a suffix, sorry. But I would ideally want something like resist on this. For your helm, just get a regular helm. For my chest, I currently have Cloak of Defiance. Now this one is pretty expensive to get. I just got this morning, but you do not need this. It's ideal because of the 10% damage taken before life mod, and you can also drop Mind Over Matter, so that saves you a passive skill. But you don't, it's not mandatory. You can run with the 4-link all you want on any chest. You can even get a rare chest with the Shaper mod for 10%. The same mod, 10% damage taken mana before life. I'm also running Voidbringer for my gloves, mainly because for the mana cost increase. Now you might think like, how much is that? How much difference does it make? Well, like I mentioned earlier, if I took off Fervent Mind, it's almost 20% damage increase. Well, it's even worse for this one. So we go from 78k, so 80k to 115k. So it's almost a 50% more damage multiplier on a glove. And you're not going to get that with any other item, like any other replacement. Now this is strictly for damage, so we might not need this, and we might want to go for more survivability, but that's something that I'll decide in the future. Rare belt, doesn't really matter what you use. Rare boots, doesn't matter what you use. Same thing with rings and amulet. I'm currently using a dream fragment, mainly for the fact that I don't like to be chilled and frozen, even with a flask mod. It's kind of annoying. And it also has a nice mana, 20% increased mana, so that's a lot of damage there as well. For my gems, I'm currently running a soon to be 6-link Orb of Storms for the single target damage, with like Energy Shield, Energy Leech, Archmage, Orb of Storms, Elemental Focus, and Lightning Penetration, with something like Control Destruction instead of Elemental Focus if I want more ailments, and a Chain / Hypothermia as my 6-link. On my Arc, I'm running Archmage, Arcane Surge, Arc, and Unleash. So the reason why I'm running Arcane Surge on my Arc is you don't really need damage. You don't need damage links when it comes to your Arc, mainly because your Arc is mainly used for clearing, so you don't really need additional damage from that because of how little health the trash mobs have, the white mobs. And because we're using so much mana, it doesn't matter, like every single cast of Arc is going to proc Arcane Surge, even at level 20. And level 20 Arcane Surge gives you 20% more damage on everything else. 20% more spell damage, 20% increased cast speed, as well as increased mana regen. So it's extremely beneficial in a build like this to run a high level Arcane Surge. And you can't run that on anything else except for like Arcane Cloak. So Arcane Cloak has an interesting interaction where you can actually run Arcane Surge, and because you're spending mana with Arcane Cloak, you gain Arcane Surge. But because of the internal cooldown and the duration of Arcane Cloak, you can't get 100% uptime on your Arcane Surge, which means that you have to use Arcane Cloak more offensively oriented, more so than you already were. And that can be a little bit finicky, especially if you don't want to die. For our Arcane Cloak, we're running Arcane Cloak with Second Wind and increased duration, mainly because, you know, it's just additional cooldown reduction is really nice. And I'll be running the Vow RF here once I bother getting around to it. For our Tempest Shield, we're running Tempest Shield with faster casting and inspiration, mainly because if you don't have inspiration, your Tempest Shield actually costs quite a bit. Cost 17, and you know, comparatively speaking, it doesn't look like much, especially since we're regenning so quickly. But main issue with this is if you have lower levels of mana, which you will have before you get geared and you're leveling, each cast of Tempest Shield is gonna take up more percentage of your mana pool, and more percentage of your mana pool that you take up, the more luck RNG you need to recover mana instead of spending mana. So down here, we don't have mana, we want to recover mana. Well, it looks like it's just increasing by 10% every time it procs, but if you don't have, if you have low cost of mana skill, or if you have high cost on your Tempest Shield compared to your mana pool, then it's actually going to drain your mana if you get bad procs. So that's why we have inspiration. We're not actually using inspiration anywhere else, so it doesn't really matter. that we're getting the charges, but yeah. For our Wave of Conviction, we have a simple spell totem setup, nothing crazy. And our helm, we have Lightning Warp. You can use Flame Dash, no problem, but I wanted to play around with our Lightning Warp a bit, especially since it got buffed. So we'll see. We'll see how I feel about it. I don't mind it too much, but it definitely sucks when I get Temporal. For the Flask, nothing really crazy here, just Diamond Flasks. I don't even know if I need them. Like, this build recovers so much mana that I don't need a Mana Flask. Yeah, I can play without this, no problem. But I just have it for bosses, just in case I have bad procs. And I'll eventually put a mod on here, maybe curse immunity or something like that, so we can take care of that aspect. So those are the gears that I have right now. Let's look in the passive tree real quick. Nothing really special except for these cluster jewels. So I'll talk about cluster jewels in just a second, but everything here so far is fairly straightforward, with focusing on spell and less on spell damage and more on spell crits, and as well as mana. So we don't want to go for the spell damage nodes as much because of the cluster jewels. And the cluster jewels is actually, if you guys haven't played around with it, it's quite insane. You want to have one of these on every single build at this point, and all builds from in the future going forward, if cluster jewels become standard, will have to take account of the fact that you don't want to spend around 10 to 15 points of passive. So most builds will have 100 points instead of 110 points when they're published or something like that. So the current one that I have is 10% increased elemental damage on the small passives, as well as Doriani's Lesson and Sadist for the two notables and a Jewel Socket. So that's just 10% increased elemental damage, but Sadist is quite insane for almost any elemental build. What you want to do is you want to get a small Abyss Jewel that has your other elements. So if you're lightning focused, you want to get fire and cold. If you're fire focused, you want to get lightning and cold. And as long as you crit, it's gonna trigger the chilled, ignite, or shocked effect. Shocked may be the hardest to get, which is why it's at 25%. So this is extremely good if you're lightning build, because you'll be shocking anyways. And this is essentially a 60% damage, a 60% increased elemental damage node. Coming with the fact that it's 10%, 10%, 10%, 60%, that's 90%, 100%, 110%. That's 110% elemental damage, which is why we're skipping spell damage nodes elsewhere. And then we have Doriani's Lessons, which is another 25% increased elemental damage. And the biggest one is the elemental damage leached as life. And it's not that big of a deal right now. It might not seem like it, but having that extra leech can be extremely good for recovery. And the fact that Tricksters get 70% increased recovery rate on everything is kind of even more beneficial. We're also running a small cluster with mana, increased maximum mana, and Scintillating Idea, which is 20% increased maximum mana, as well as 5% damage, lightning resistance penetration. So it's just more damage there. Overall, the build is extremely fun. I really like the interaction between mana resource, as not only just take care of it when you're level 10 or level 20, 30, whenever you take care of it, and then forget. Like, you don't just reserve away everything and use a Eternal Mana Flask, an Enduring Mana Flask, to forget about mana problems forever. I actually like the fact that when you're mapping, you don't really have to worry too much, but if there are hard-hitting mobs, you certainly have to worry about, hey, do I want to cast this skill right now? Do I want to sacrifice my survivability for damage? Do I want to reserve my mana, as in just keep it, not cast any skills, and make sure I have enough effective life pool for that next big hit? So there's a lot of interactions that are going on, and I'm really happy with this build. I'll be exploring other builds that are Archmage oriented in the future, especially with Val skills. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys found it helpful for your own Archmage adventures, or any other ideas that you might have gotten from this. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.